I never imagined I would see him clinking champagne glasses with someone else. Not even once. But there he was, smiling too brightly for my comfort. And for a moment, I thought my heart might literally shatter in the middle of the office floor, where everyone's eyes were glued to the celebration like bees to honey. It was supposed to be a regular Thursday. I had planned to bring him coffee, maybe a slice of his favorite carrot cake from the bakery around the corner. But instead, I walked in on that scene, the promotion celebration I had been secretly hoping for him to share with me. Not her. His assistant, a cheerful girl named Clara, was holding the champagne flute, laughing in a way that made my chest tighten. My footsteps faltered on the polished hardwood floor, and I suddenly felt invisible. Daniel, his name always sounded like it belonged to someone important, like a character from a classic romance novel, turned his head and caught my gaze. For a split second, there was recognition, a flicker of something that felt like guilt. But then his smile returned, blindingly bright and completely misread by everyone around. My fingers itched to reach for the door handle, to escape the cruel joke of being an outsider in his happiness. As I walked toward the exit, I felt the office hum around me, phones buzzing, computers typing, heels clicking. I imagined that everyone noticed me leaving, but no one cared. The city skyline glittered beyond the glass walls, an indifferent witness to my heartbreak. "Hey, Alex," Daniel called, his voice unexpectedly soft. My name fell into the air like a whispered apology I wasn't ready to accept. I stopped. My back still faced him. "Alex, wait." The hook in his voice was subtle but impossible to ignore, a thread pulling me back. Even when my pride demanded I flee, I hesitated. I had met Daniel 3 years ago in a cramped, overstuffed coffee shop in Brooklyn. He had been arguing with a barista over the foam on his cappuccino, and yet, there had been something in his eyes, a vulnerability masked by arrogance, that had drawn me in instantly. Our first conversation had been sarcastic, biting, full of playful jabs, but underneath it all, there had been an unspoken connection neither of us wanted to acknowledge. Over time, that spark became a quiet obsession for me. I watched him thrive, I watched him succeed, and I loved him silently with an intensity that scared even me. Seeing him celebrate with someone else was like pouring salt over an old wound. Clara's laugh rang in my ears, and I felt the familiar twist of jealousy and despair curling in my stomach. And yet, even in that moment, something in Daniel's eyes tugged at me. There was regret, yes, but also something more, a subtle plea, almost invisible, almost too late. He stepped closer, but I didn't turn. My heart raced anyway. My pride screamed at me to keep walking, to protect the fragile armor I had built over years of longing. But curiosity, that reckless little trait, betrayed me. "Alex, I didn't want it to look like that," he said quietly, almost to himself. I froze. The faint echo of sincerity in his tone was disarming. My fingers tightened around the door handle. I wanted to run. I wanted to stay. I wanted to scream. Finally, I turned. He looked different up close, softer, vulnerable, far less composed than he seemed in the office persona everyone else adored. His eyes, a deep shade of stormy gray, searched mine, hesitant, unsure. And in that instant, I remembered every small moment we had shared. The coffee runs, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the stolen glances across the conference room, the quiet companionship that had grown into something unspoken but undeniable. "I should have told you. A long time ago," he continued, stepping even closer, now only a few feet away. The room seemed to shrink, the noise fading into a blur of muted colors and distant chatter. I swallowed hard. "Told me what, Daniel?" His lips curved into a half-smile, half-apology. "That I've been an idiot. That I've been blind. That you matter more to me than I ever realized." For the first time that evening, the champagne and laughter felt irrelevant. My chest ached, a sweet sort of pain that reminded me I was alive, that I had dared to care. And suddenly, the office, the skyline, even Clara, melted into the background. There was only us, two flawed, stubborn hearts finally acknowledging the truth. I took a tentative step forward, unsure if I was falling into a trap or finally into something real. "Why now?" I whispered. Because I almost lost you, he admitted, his voice low, sincere, trembling slightly. And I can't do that again. The world outside the windows glowed with the dying light of the city, as if approving this fragile reconciliation. I saw him then, not the polished executive, not the man everyone else adored, but Daniel, messy, earnest, human, reaching for me. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't step back. The office felt impossibly quiet after that, as if the hum of the city outside had slowed down just for us. Daniel's eyes didn't leave mine, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt like I wasn't just a shadow lurking in the background of his life. I felt visible. I didn't speak immediately. My pride was still raw, and the hurt from the earlier scene had left its mark. But there was something magnetic in the way he stood there, vulnerability threading through his usual confidence, that made it impossible to walk away. You really mean it? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. I've never meant anything more in my life, he replied, and the honesty in his tone hit me like a wave. It was overwhelming and terrifying, and yet I found myself stepping closer, unable to resist the pull between us. We ended up on the balcony, the city sprawling beneath us in a patchwork of lights and shadows. The wind from the skyscrapers whipped around, tossing our hair and carrying away the tension that had been building for weeks. Daniel leaned against the railing, shoulders relaxed for the first time that evening, and I followed suit. I don't understand, I said softly, staring out at the endless horizon. Why didn't you ever show me that you felt the same? He rubbed a hand over his face, his fingers tugging at his dark hair in frustration. I was stupid. I thought I could handle it, that I could compartmentalize things, that I could manage my feelings without hurting anyone. I never realized I was hurting you the most. I swallowed the lump in my throat. His admission was like a bomb and a sting at the same time. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, 3 years of unspoken feelings, nearly lost opportunities, and here we were, finally facing the truth. You really don't understand, I said, a small smile tugging at my lips despite the storm of emotions inside me. I've been trying to be invisible because I thought you'd never see me. And here you are, telling me all of this when I'm already standing at the edge of walking away. Daniel reached out then, hesitating, as if the simple act of touching me carried more weight than either of us could fully comprehend. I held my breath as his fingers brushed against mine, and in that instant, every doubt, every hurt, every moment of longing melted into a quiet, electric connection. Don't walk away, Alex, he murmured. His voice was low, almost desperate. Not now, not ever. Something in me broke and reformed in that moment. I stepped closer, letting his hand capture mine fully, feeling the warmth and the rhythm of his pulse. The city lights reflected in his eyes, making them shimmer like liquid silver, and I realized I had been waiting for this moment far longer than I had understood. For a long while, we just stood there, hands entwined, leaning slightly into each other. There were no words, just the shared breath and the quiet acknowledgement that something powerful had shifted between us. The skyline stretched endlessly, indifferent yet breathtaking, a silent witness to our reunion. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice trembling slightly. I know I don't deserve your trust right away, but I want to earn it, every day, if you let me. I turned to look at him fully, seeing not the executive everyone admired, but the man who had quietly inhabited my heart for years. The boyish vulnerability that had first drawn me to him was still there, mingling with the sophistication and drive that made him who he was. Then prove it, I whispered, a small but determined smile forming on my lips. The relief in his eyes was almost palpable, and he pulled me into a hug that was firm, grounding, and full of everything we hadn't dared to say. My arms wrapped around him in return, and for the first time, I felt the weight of unspoken emotions lift. Over the next few days, the office dynamics shifted subtly. I wasn't invisible anymore. Daniel found small ways to acknowledge my presence: a coffee left on my desk in the morning, a shared laugh over a mundane project, a glance that lingered just long enough to make my heart race. It wasn't all smooth, of course. Clara, the assistant who had shared the promotion toast with him, was still around. She seemed oblivious at first, but eventually, subtle tensions arose. Daniel handled it with surprising grace, always keeping our connection quiet, careful not to expose the fragility of our new understanding. One evening, he invited me to dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the Hudson. The city stretched out beneath us, a sea of lights and possibility. The wind carried the faint scent of rain, and I realized it had been a long time since I had felt this alive, this hopeful. "You know," he said, his voice low and intimate, "I kept imagining what it would be like if I told you sooner. I imagined this moment countless times, but never like this with you actually here, and not just in my daydreams." I laughed softly, the sound mingling with the evening breeze. "Stop torturing yourself. You're here now. That's what matters." He reached across the table, taking my hand in his once more. His touch was familiar and electric, grounding me while also stirring something wild and unexpected. "I don't ever want to lose this again. You, me. It's too important." The honesty in his words, the openness in his eyes, made my heart ache with relief and joy. "Then don't," I replied simply, feeling a warmth spread through me that was more comforting than anything I had known. Weeks turned into months, and our relationship evolved in ways that neither of us had anticipated. The office became our shared world, a place where quiet glances and subtle touches spoke volumes. We learned to navigate the delicate balance between professional boundaries and personal connection, finding solace in stolen moments and late-night conversations over leftover coffee. There were challenges, of course, past insecurities, lingering doubts, and the occasional misunderstanding threatened to unravel the fragile fabric of our newfound happiness. But every time, we returned to each other, drawn by the undeniable bond that had taken root in those early, painful days of longing. One rainy afternoon, we found ourselves in the empty conference room, the city washed in gray light and the sound of raindrops against the windows. Daniel pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. "I don't want to hide anymore," he said softly. "Not from the world, not from anyone, especially not from you." I smiled, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my touch. "Then don't," I whispered, echoing the words that had become our quiet mantra. The storm outside seemed to mirror the intensity of our emotions, fierce yet cleansing, washing away the remnants of fear and doubt. In that moment, the office, the city, even the complexities of our lives faded into insignificance. There was only us, two hearts entwined, learning to navigate love and life together. Our first real weekend together was a revelation. Daniel and I drove upstate, escaping the relentless pace of New York for a small cabin by a lake. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, a stark contrast to the polished office spaces and city streets we were used to. We spent hours walking along the shore, talking about everything and nothing, laughing until our sides ached. Daniel would steal glances at me, his eyes soft with something between admiration and tenderness, and I found myself responding with the same intensity. One evening, sitting by the fireplace with the crackling warmth enveloping us, he took my hand and said, "I want to be more than just someone who exists in your background. I want to be the one who's always there, through every success, every failure, every quiet moment." I looked at him, my heart full and unsteady. "You are," I replied. "You've always been." And in the soft glow of the firelight, with the world outside muted and distant, we shared our first kiss, tentative, electric, and infinitely reassuring. It was the culmination of years of longing, the bridge between pain and joy, and the beginning of something that promised both passion and permanence. Back in New York, life didn't suddenly become simple. Work pressures, office politics, and personal insecurities still existed, but Daniel and I faced them together. Every challenge was an opportunity to grow closer, every misunderstanding a chance to reinforce trust. We discovered small joys. Sunday mornings spent making pancakes, late-night drives through the city streets with music blaring, quiet evenings reading together in the apartment he had finally let me move into. These moments, though seemingly mundane, became the threads that wove our lives into a tapestry of intimacy and shared experience. And yet, the memory of that first painful celebration lingered, a reminder of how close we had come to losing each other. It shaped our connection, making it stronger, more aware, more precious. Every glance, every touch carried the weight of that lesson. Never take love for granted. Months later, Daniel received another promotion. This time, we celebrated quietly together, away from the office, away from the eyes of colleagues and assistants. There was champagne, yes, but also laughter, whispered promises, and the kind of intimacy that can only exist between two people who have endured storms together. As we stood on the balcony of our apartment, looking out at the city lights, Daniel wrapped his arm around me. "You know," he murmured, "I could never have gotten here without you, not just in the office, but in life." I leaned into him, resting my head against his chest. "And I could never have done it without you," I replied, "for being patient, for being stubborn, for finally seeing me." We stayed like that for a long time, the city sprawling beneath us, indifferent yet magnificent, a witness to our story. And in that moment, I realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions alone. It was about presence, trust, and the quiet, unwavering commitment to stand by someone, no matter the odds. The journey had been turbulent, full of longing, misunderstandings, and unspoken desires. But as we watched the lights of New York twinkle like stars beneath us, I understood that every heartache, every moment of doubt, had led us here to this fragile, beautiful happiness. Daniel turned to me, his eyes reflecting the city and the depth of his feelings. "I don't know what the future holds," he said softly, "but I do know I want to face it with you." I smiled, the kind of smile that carries both relief and hope. "Then we'll face it together," I replied. And as the night embraced us, I felt a warmth spread through me, not just from the city lights or the fire in the apartment, but from the undeniable truth that we had finally found each other, in all our messy, beautiful human glory. The next few months passed in a blur of shared routines, quiet discoveries, and moments that seemed to stretch forever. Daniel and I had settled into a rhythm that was both exhilarating and comforting. Our mornings were spent with laughter over burnt toast or rushed coffee runs, and our evenings were quiet, sometimes spent in the dim glow of the city lights, sometimes in the chaos of our own little adventures. Despite the calm, there was always the memory of that first painful scene, the promotion celebration I had walked into alone, seeing him toast with someone else. It had been a wound, yes, but one that reminded us both how fragile happiness could be and how fiercely we needed to protect it. One Sunday, Daniel suggested a trip to the coast, a spontaneous escape from the city's constant hum. We drove along the Atlantic shoreline, the salt air whipping through the open windows, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks echoing our unspoken emotions. There was freedom in the distance, in the horizon stretching endlessly before us. We stopped at a small lighthouse perched on a cliff. I remember him looking out over the ocean, his expression soft, almost vulnerable, the way it had been that first night on the balcony. "It's beautiful," he said quietly, but I could hear the deeper meaning beneath the words. "It's perfect," I replied, leaning against him, feeling the warmth of his body. "But not as perfect as this as us." He turned to look at me then, eyes reflecting the late afternoon sun glinting off the water. "You really think we've made it through everything?" he asked, voice tinged with disbelief and awe. "After all the mistakes, the near misses, us?" I smiled, the kind of smile that carried relief, hope, and quiet certainty. "We're still here, aren't we?" I said. "And that's what matters." He reached for my hand, holding it gently, almost reverently. "I don't ever want to be without you," he murmured. "Not for a second." I leaned into him, feeling his heartbeat sync with mine. For the first time, the fear that had haunted me for years, the fear of being sidelined, overlooked, left behind, melted completely. Here, on this cliff overlooking the endless sea, I knew that we had found something worth fighting for, worth holding on to. Back in New York, Life resumed its familiar rhythm, but everything had changed between us. The office no longer felt like a battlefield of unspoken tension. Instead, it became a shared stage where subtle gestures, private jokes, and quiet glances conveyed more than words ever could. Daniel had grown attentive in ways I hadn't dared to hope for, a text checking if I'd eaten lunch, an unexpected smile across the conference table, a hand brushing mine as we walked down the hall. And I too had changed. I wasn't the passive observer of his life anymore. I was a participant, a partner, someone who could voice desires, share victories, and confront setbacks with him. The walls I had built around my heart had begun to crumble, replaced by trust, tenderness, and a profound intimacy that neither of us had anticipated. One particularly rainy evening, we found ourselves back on our apartment balcony. The city lights shimmered through the raindrops, distorted but mesmerizing. Daniel pulled me close, resting his chin on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his breath against my ear. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice barely audible over the rain, "about how much I've missed everything with you. The quiet moments, the small touches, the way we just are together." I leaned my head against his, letting the warmth of his body chase away the chill from the storm. "You don't have to think anymore," I whispered. "We're living it now. That's what counts." He chuckled softly, a sound full of relief and happiness. "I love that we can finally be like this. No pretenses, no misunderstandings. Just us." "Just us?" I echoed, savoring the simplicity and depth of the words. Daniel and I also began exploring new horizons together, hobbies, experiences, and shared adventures we had both neglected in the rush of careers and responsibilities. We took weekend trips to upstate New York, hiking trails blanketed in autumn leaves, the air crisp with promise. We experimented with cooking together, laughing at our burnt attempts and celebrating the few successes that emerged. We spent late nights reading side by side, exchanging book recommendations and opinions, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting shadows that danced on our walls. Through it all, the bond between us deepened. There were moments of tension, of course, times when old insecurities crept in or when Daniel's work demanded more than he could give. But each time we returned to each other, learning how to communicate, how to listen, how to be patient with both our flaws and strengths. One evening, Daniel surprised me by organizing a small gallery visit in Chelsea. It was a quiet exhibit, filled with abstract paintings and photographs of cityscapes. As we wandered from room to room, he would occasionally brush my hand or nudge me gently, reminding me in subtle ways that he was here, and that he belonged to me as much as I belonged to him. At one point, we found ourselves standing before a large canvas, a swirl of colors that seemed chaotic yet harmonious. Daniel turned to me, eyes serious, searching. "This reminds me of us," he said softly. "A little messy, a little unpredictable, but beautiful when we work together." I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I like that," I replied. "I like us." He leaned in then, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple, and I felt the kind of contentment I hadn't known was possible. The turning point came unexpectedly, on a quiet Friday evening. Daniel had been working late, and I had lingered in the apartment, reading and listening to music. When he finally arrived, soaked from the sudden rainstorm, he looked different, tired, yes, but also vulnerable in a way that made my heart ache. "I messed up," he admitted, removing his wet jacket and sitting beside me. "I didn't manage my time well. I know I said I'd be more present, but..." His voice trailed off and I reached out, taking his hand. "Hey," I said gently, "you're here now. That's what matters." He looked at me then, eyes full of gratitude and longing. "I don't ever want to take this for granted again," he said. You mean too much to me." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you mean too much to me," I replied. And in that moment, we didn't just acknowledge our love, we celebrated it. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confessions, just two hearts aligned, two souls finally free to exist together without fear or hesitation. The months that followed were filled with small joys and steady growth. We learned to navigate the complexities of life as a team, supporting each other through career challenges, family expectations, and personal struggles. Every evening, we found moments of quiet intimacy sharing meals, talking about dreams, or simply holding each other as the city hummed below. Our friends noticed the change too. The way Daniel would glance at me across a crowded room, the subtle ways we communicated without words, the easy laughter and playful teasing, it was undeniable that we had become inseparable. One Saturday morning, we took a walk through Central Park, the crisp autumn air brushing our cheeks. Leaves crunched beneath our feet as we wandered along familiar paths, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel stopped suddenly, turning to face me, his eyes soft yet intense. "Alex," he said, his voice firm but tender. "I want us to keep building this every day, every moment. You're the most important part of my life, and I don't ever want to forget that." I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the sun or the season. "I feel the same way," I said, my fingers intertwining with his. "We've come a long way, and I want to see where this goes." He smiled, a mix of relief and joy, and pulled me into a tight embrace. "Then let's do it," he whispered. Together, the city stretched around us, vast and indifferent, yet somehow it felt intimate, like it was quietly cheering for us. The world continued on, but for that moment we were the only two people that mattered. Eventually, Daniel and I moved in together officially, combining our lives and creating a home that reflected both of our personalities. The apartment was filled with laughter, warmth, and small reminders of our journey, photographs from trips, little notes left for each other, books and paintings scattered across rooms. Evenings were spent cooking together, debating over music choices, or simply sitting on the balcony watching the city lights. Weekends were filled with adventures, from hiking trails to coastal escapes, always together, always connected. And every night, when we finally lay down, side by side, hands entwined, we would share quiet words of love, gratitude, and hope. Every challenge we had faced, every misunderstanding we had survived, felt like a distant memory, softened by the knowledge that we had finally found each other. Years later, as I looked back on that first painful celebration, I realized something profound. It had been the catalyst that brought us together. The heartbreak, the jealousy, the near loss, all of it had led to this, to a love that was steadfast, tender, and enduring. Daniel squeezed my hand gently, his eyes reflecting the golden afternoon light. "You're my home," he said simply, "and I never want to be anywhere else." I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. "Neither do I," I replied. The city sprawled around us, vast and endless, but it no longer felt intimidating or lonely. It was a backdrop to our story, a witness to a love that had survived doubt, distance, and fear. And as the sun dipped below the skyline, casting a warm glow over everything, I knew with unwavering certainty that we had finally found the happiness we had both been seeking. Together, no more misunderstandings, no more unspoken words, just two hearts finally free, finally home. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.